My name is Carl Vondero. I am president of Partners in Crime San Diego, which is the San Diego chapter of Sisters in Crime. And along with me here, I have Allison Van Rosenvinch, who is the president of the New York chapter of Sisters in Crime. And we want to welcome everybody to the event today, where we're going to present our two anthologies. First of all, I'm going to give a little word about what we are as Sisters in Crime. We are a community of fans and writers of crime fiction and nonfiction. And Sisters in Crime is a national organization. There are about 4,000 members in several countries. We've got about 60 chapters, and then individual chapters in cities across North America, principally. We would like you, if you are not currently a member of Sisters in Crime, to really consider becoming one, because it is a very active, supportive community. And you can be active with your local chapter. And you need to be active with your national chapter, because they provide us with a lot of support. And by doing that, you not only get access to local events, but you get some member-only local events. You get access to newsletters, both local and national, and you can join in on these kinds of virtual presentations with other Sisters in Crime chapters throughout the country. So please do that. And just as a word to the wise, you need to become a member of the national and the local chapter. National is about to increase their membership dues on February 1. So hurry up and become a member. And with that, I'd like to introduce Allison Van Rosenvinch, who is, as I said, the president of the New York chapter, and she'll tell a little bit about how the day is going. And I should mention San Diego Sisters in Crime, we have 40 some members. We're very active in the Southern California region. We work our own events, and we also do joint events with other Sisters in Crime chapters. So please go ahead, Allison.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Carl. I put in the chat, everyone, some of the New York City chapter membership benefits, rather than spending time, because we're all here actually to listen to the authors of these fabulous stories. I echo what Carl said. We're really excited. We think this may be the first joint anthology event that Sisters in Crime has done. So that's kind of cool. That also does mean that we're probably working out some kinks. So that is why I'm going to go through how we're planning for this day to go. I am going to sort of key off of one thing Carl said about how great being part of this organization is if you're interested in crime fiction and suspense. I think it is a really wonderfully supportive space, and something that, aside from what I put in the chat about our chapter, I have to say, when you're part of a chapter, just the members are so kind and generous and diverse, and it's just a great place. No matter where you are in your writing journey or what your goals are, you will find someone who's there with you and can help you out. And I've seen that over and over again in the New York chapter, and I just couldn't recommend it more highly. Now, moving on to why we're all here, which is we have these absolutely insanely wonderful stories, crazy and different. And well, I'm going to stop there. We're just going to get instructions. Okay. First of all, for any information on the panel discussions, if you're interested in the anthologies or the panelists, rather than spending time on that right here, look into the chat. You'll see information about where you can buy the anthologies. And in the anthologies themselves, you'll have information about the authors. We're trying to keep this clean and neat, which means we're really limiting the time. So look for the excess information in the chat. In terms of questions, we're going to be asking all of the panelists questions in each panel. If you have a question during the panel, please put it into the Q&A part of this drop-down menu rather than the chat section. We're going to be looking at the Q&A section, and if you see a question there that you really like, give it a thumbs up, because at the end of all of the panels, Dawn Barclay is going to be reading the questions, and if there's a question that everybody is interested in, she will ask that one first. So if you see something that you really like, we're going to prioritize those questions that way. If there are questions that don't need a whole panel response, we'll try to answer them in the chat. In terms of the sequence of events, we're going to start off with the first panel, which is same as it ever was, historical perspectives. I'm going to be moderating that, and we have the authors Carl Vondero, Cornelia Faye, I think I'm getting that wrong, and Catherine Seaman. The second panel is going to be same as it never was, The Dangers of Assumption, with Carl moderating, and we have Kim Keyline, Barry Summy, Nancy Good, Ellen Quint, and Cheryl Garrett. The third panel is going to be same as it always was, The Scourge of Discrimination, with Dawn Barclay moderating. We have Mary Jo Robertiello, Pam Lilly, and Catherine Mayorisi. The fourth panel is Breaking All the Laws, Genre Bending, Plots, and POV. I'm going to be moderating that one, and these are some of the most original stories. Dawn Barkley, Kathy Cravat, Ellie Hartford, BJ Graff, and Melinda Loomis. Then finally, we'll have Dames Looking into Cause. Dawn will be moderating that with Barbara DeMarco Barrett, Susie Case, Lori Robbins, and Suzanne Haworth. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Apologies if I'm not. The final panel is going to be with our editors, which is fabulous. Carl's going to be moderating that one with Matt Coyle, Lisa Brackman, Dawn Barclay, and Joseph DeMarco. And then at the end, Dawn will be getting to all of your questions. If you have any technical problems, please message Kim Keyline in the chat. Yes, I can pronounce that name. Sorry about that. So let's get started. We're going to start off with same as it ever was, historical perspectives. We're going to have about 9 minutes for this panel, which is short and brief. And what I'm going to ask all of the panelists, we'll have Carl Vonderow, Cornelia Fay, and Catherine Seaman. Please join us. And I will start with you, Carl. I would like, if you could each give about a one sentence, 2-sentence summary of your story, then we'll get into the questions, and I'm going to start with you. So Carl, give us a little overview of your story.
Okay. So I haven't done this before, but a 12-year-old street orphan in Colombia is seduced to becoming a serial killer or becoming a contract killer because that is the best prospect in his life.
Oh, all right. That was actually nice, short and sweet. Okay, Cornelia, can you give us a short and sweet overview of your story?
My story is about a border crossing from West to East Berlin when the Berlin Wall was still up, and going through the S-Bahn station Bahnhof Friedrichstraße, which is the name of the story. And this border crossing went wrong, very wrong.
All right. And then Catherine.
So my story is set in 1890, and it's about a pioneering woman lawyer who has a practice among the immigrants in the Lower East Side. And in particular, in this story, there is an object, the teacup of the story, which has more value and significance than it might seem to at first.
Okay, that is actually a nice description. All right. These were interesting stories because they all, they're all historical. Catherine's is obviously historical, whereas both Carl's and Cornelia's, many of us were alive during the period where Carl and Cornelia were writing, and I think none of us were alive for when Catherine was writing. But they all sort of involve sort of socioeconomic or political systems that are probably different than the ones where we are living in currently. And so they impact the lives of the individuals that are in the stories themselves. And actually, Catherine, yours, this applied for all the stories, but Catherine, yours was one where it really struck me of how you're conceiving of your protagonist and the challenges that they face in terms of this larger sort of socioeconomic and political context. Do you have any thoughts about that when you were writing the story? What were you thinking?
So the protagonist came from just some research I'd done on early women lawyers, and I just thought it was interesting. It's much earlier than most people think, and just the kinds of things she would have faced. And I was particularly drawn to the time period because it's kind of the borderline between the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era, which followed afterwards. And in the larger scope of what I hope will be a series, you have the immigrant experience, you have like the Gilded Age wealthy, and like just all of these different worlds that are sharing a city together. And so even in the teacup, you see some of these different colliding worlds and how they interact.
That is true, and you're correct. I was a little bit. I didn't realize that there were female attorneys as early as what you have going on here, and that plays out interestingly in the story.
1869 in Iowa was the first one.
Iowa. Oh,
yeah.
right.
And our friends in California beat New York by about 10 years for the first women lawyers. So,
all right, fascinating. I guess sort of jumping a little bit, I think that, well, actually, no, I'm going to ask Cornelia, did you really dealt with sort of some political issues in your story. How do you think that impacted the way that your protagonist handled things? Because I remember Berlin when there was Checkpoint Charlie. I had been there. I've been to Checkpoint Charlie back in the 80s. What role did that play for you, the individuals and then the larger system where they were that they inhabit?
So my story is set in 1985. So it was 4 years before the wall came down. And it was during that time when this wall just cut Berlin in half. And I was visiting in Berlin, and it's based on a true story. And of course, I embellished it a little bit, and also I left some things out. But I crossed over just for a day trip to East Berlin, which was possible, but not the other way around. So East Berliners couldn't go. And the border crossing was actually a train station, Bahnhof Friedrichstraße. And if you go to Berlin today, they left a part of this station just as it was in the 80s. So you can still see the turnstile. It's all very kind of old-fashioned, and it looks very bureaucratic going through those different stages. And in order to go to East Berlin, you had to exchange quite a bit of money. Eastmark from Westmark into Eastmark. And these Eastmarks were basically garbage. They were worth nothing, and you couldn't really do anything with them. So the problem was always, well, how do I spend that money while I'm over in East Berlin? And I went to the museum, the Pergamon Museum, which is like one of the most beautiful museums in the world, with the big Babylonian Ishtar gate and the reconstructed Pergamon altar from the ancient Greek Hellenistic period. And that cost about like 75 cents, a penny here at that time. And I had to exchange 25 Eastmarks. So then maybe you had lunch or coffee, and that was maybe at most 2.50, 2 marks 50. So there were still these 20 Eastmarks left, and you couldn't bring them back. And you weren't allowed to give tips either. So they had to refuse taking tips. So the story is basically the only thing I could think of was on Alexanderplatz. There was with a big television tower, which I'm sure you've all seen in pictures of Berlin. So I bought some. Back then we still used audio cassettes, if you can remember that. So I bought 3 cassettes of classical music, and then on the way back over to go back to West Berlin, and I think I even had a plane to catch, I was waved aside. All my possessions were confiscated, and I was put into an underground cell 3 stories below ground for several hours. And so that's basically where the story takes place. And I'm not going to tell you how it resolved. Obviously, I did get out, but it was a very, you asked about the kind of political situation at the time, and tensions were very high between East and West, as I think some of you remember. And so
I think we're getting a little short on time here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right. So yeah, that's about it. And you may have to read the story to find out how.
And I highly recommend it. It's a great story. And I'm sorry but we need to go to Carl. And Carl, yours is so interesting because you choose a different point of view than what I think I would have expected given the storyline. So why did you choose the point of view that you did. Can you give us some insight into that?
Sure. A little bit of background. In 1995, I went to Bogota and wandered around the streets for a book, trying to get the basis for a book. And I had friends there who was a faceless prosecutor, another friend who worked with street orphans. And what I learned was that at the time, because of the immigration from rural to the city, there was a civil war going on in Colombia. There were intense pressures on families, and children were actually being thrust out onto the street, particularly boys, street orphans. These boys would be from the age of 5 to about 15 when they would get into crime. And they lived on the streets. They had their own language. They slept in the sewers because it was warmer there. They rode on the back of the bumpers of buses and cars. And I thought, what would it be like to get inside the head of a kid like that who's 12 years old? And the way I did it was I kind of approached from the victim, who is a faceless prosecutor, which is closest to the way we think in this country. And gradually, through other people, I get closer and closer to the boy until you finally get inside his head and realize the reasons why he is becoming a killer.
It is another definite story worth reading. It's fascinating, and I know my timer went off, so we're done. On to the next one. Let's see.
Okay, that's me. Okay, so everyone could. Are we all here? Good. I would like to introduce everyone on our panel. We have Kim Keyline, who wrote a story called The Crossing, Nancy Good, who wrote What Matters Most, Cheryl Garrett, who wrote Breath, Ellen Quint, who wrote Risky Assumptions, and Barry Summey, who wrote Manipulations. And again, if each of you could give one sentence as to what your story is about, that would be great.
Sure, starting with whom?
Oh, let's start with Kim.
Okay, hi everyone. So my story, The Crossing, is literally about a woman on the worst day of her life crossing from Mexico to San Isidro when a man with a gun appears in her car and she has to fight for her life. So thank you.
And Nancy Good.
Sure, thanks so much. My story is about a murder that takes place in an extremely wealthy church on Madison Avenue in New York City's Upper East Side, in a place you'd never expect to see a murder, and the people there are not people who you think are murderers.
Ellen, how about yours?
Sure, like all the ones in our anthology, it takes place in New York. My story features a 60-something private investigator who takes full advantage of the assumptions folks make about little old ladies.
Great. And Barry.
My story is about a young woman who gets framed for the murder of her best friend's philandering boyfriend.
Wow. So as you can see, these stories are wonderfully different.
You skipped Cheryl.
Skip Cheryl.
Yeah.
Cheryl,
Is it working now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so mine is about a young woman who becomes the sharpshooter that really takes down the University of Texas sniper. And of course, there's all kinds of assumptions on that one, but it's kind of a historical as well, or alternative history.
So as you can see, all these stories are wonderfully different, and they all involve assumptions. And let me start with Kim on The Crossing. Your story plays with the reader's assumptions, as well as the assumptions of the characters. Can you tell us, how did you set up those reader assumptions?
Oh, well, it was my first short story, so I was really struggling with how to do it. I kept things simple by keeping it 2 people in a car, which helped. And then you make certain assumptions about this woman because she's small, she's blonde, she's simply frustrated in a traffic jam. she's, looking at the surroundings. There's a lot of talk about people in the lines trying to sell her stuff. And so you sort of start making assumptions about who she is, how she interacts with Mexico, why is she living in Mexico? And then, we find out that some of those assumptions are definitely not true by the time you get to the end. And it was just laying out small little hints as I went. And it took quite a few revisions, but I hope it worked.
It did. It did. It worked. It was quite a surprise at the ending. And Nancy, I thought it was really interesting the way you used objects in your story to create certain assumptions, like wallet and scissors, and even the way the string was across the pews. How did you use all those things?
Well, it's interesting you picked those objects. Yes, those were objects that are involved in the crime. But I started out with objects on the Upper East Side. The cars that come to pick up at the most elite private school in New York City cost at least $60,000 a year now, off Madison Avenue in the 90s. It's loaded with this, and the chauffeur driven with bodyguards. So I start with how wealthy this area is and how wealthy these people are, and the first person, which is, I write in first person, is not the person. The mother is not a wealthy person at all. They're on scholarship and money, whatever. So that's the objects that I start with: how wealthy, and makeup that people are using, and clothes they're wearing, to describe what is actually, I think, the second wealthiest area in this country. The first is Silicon Valley over there in California. The second is the Upper East Side of New York. So from there, I then go to the church, which is beautiful, and the stained glass windows, which are by Tiffany, and how gorgeous they are, and how, this is a prestigious, beautiful church. And then to, what was given to them, to these two mothers who are chaperones on this class trip to the church to hear a concert. That's the idea. And it's just scissors and twine to, rope off the area for the children who are sitting there and make sure they get great seats, the best seats, of course, and how this then becomes part of the murder scene, which takes place in the church. And there are many suspects, so I do bring up other people. That was one of the questions. That's part of a writer's job, is to have other suspects besides the ones you want, the one you want at the end. So, and none of them are people that you would think would commit a murder or would ever have committed a murder before.
Yeah, it was great. And as the story goes on, you get more and more suspects. So, yeah. So, and Cheryl, you have all kinds of assumptions that you play with for a woman sharpshooter. And it was interesting how you set those up with the police and the FBI, et cetera, as well as the flashbacks. How could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was on the rival team in college, so this was sort of a natural for me. But yes, there was all kinds of assumptions for me as a shooter, of course. But there were also lots of conspiracy rumors when I was.
Oh, dear.
Whitman. And so that was kind of exciting to play with something that was historical, but maybe not actually accurate. This was also the first time that people decided they needed SWAT teams because it was such a holy mess in Austin. So yeah, I loved all the history about it and all the assumptions that a woman can't do certain things. So that was exciting for me.
That was great. Yeah, and even at the end, how you sort of had a twist onto the assumptions of what a sharpshooter would be, but there was kind of a womanly point of view.
Yeah, I do. It was, even when I was firing, it was difficult for the girls in my group to shoot. I'd never shot anything that was alive, and certainly not at a person. But when you're talking about thousands of people maybe getting shot, hundreds of people being shot versus one person, then you have to make a choice. And that was her choice.
Yeah. Ellen, we have all kinds of assumptions of what fictional PIs are, fictional police are, what real PIs are, what real lawyers are. Tell us a little bit about how you play with all those assumptions.
I think that in a short story, you have such a short amount of time to convey your message that I ended up really trying to focus very much on both the lawyer, who is wheelchair bound, and the PI, who is 60 plus, as I said, and the just assumptions people make about people who are what we would think of as disabled or elderly. And also it's set with an issue around the hashtag Me Too. So there's sexual harassment assumptions in there also. Yeah, so there was an awful lot to play with. But I must tell you that my biggest challenge, and I think it's the challenge for many authors, I would hope so at this stage, is how do you build character, particularly in a short story, without stereotyping? Because it's so easy to fall into stereotypes, both in the language that they're using and how you're describing them, etc. It's very hard. It's a very fine line to walk.
It is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. You've got to be so efficient. Barry, let me ask you. You had so many twists in this story. It was very fun. And you set up all kinds of assumptions. I was particularly struck at how the voice was different from the beginning of the story versus the long flashback in the middle. So how did you set all that up?
Well, I wanted to write about a character who's clueless and naive, and she made assumptions right off the bat about who she could trust and who she couldn't trust. And that's what gets her into hot water. So when you have a character and you don't trust who she's choosing to trust, then as a reader, you don't know who to put your trust in either. So I think that's how she changed. I mean, she went from being pretty spineless and just kind of going along with the game to ending up being framed and then having to deal with that once she wound up in prison. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was tough for me because I actually write middle grade fiction. So it was hard. It was a weird leap into the adult world, but very fun because all of a sudden there was murder, a little bit of sex, a little bit of drugs, like stuff that I don't deal with generally. So
yeah, I think your middle graders are going to be very interested to read this story.
And their parents and the librarians.
Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left here. So let me throw out a question to everyone, and we'll try and keep our answers very short. How do you set up clues in the stories that will break the assumptions at the end so that they're subtle, but you play fair with the reader? Anyone?
I'll jump in with 2 seconds. I think mentioning the clue and just dropping it in and moving along and not making a big deal about it. Like I had one clue that was disposable plastic gloves, mentioned it once, and then it becomes part of the murder scene, and that was it.
Okay. Ellen, you had your hand up.
I think it goes back to the show, don't tell, so wherever you can, build in either actions or items or subtle things that don't pop out to bop the reader on the head, but that plant a seed.
How about you, Cheryl? I think you kind of did that in the flashbacks. That was really good.
Yes. Now I do the flashbacks and creating tension. I think tension also helps with clues because you know that there is a movement forward. So flashbacks and like they said, the small things. The mention of the rifle, the mention of don't touch my she has it in a case, don't touch my case, and suddenly the rifle becomes very important. Yeah.
Nancy, you had a few of those as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about emotional clues as well, because I like to talk about that. And
right.
Emotional clues can be the facial expression of the guy in the chorus, because this short story began as a first chapter for the next in my series, and I turned it into a short story. And so I didn't know where it was going, but just having the facial expressions of people, the way they look at each other, the way they appear, or maybe that person did it, or maybe that person did it. The clues, I have to say, the editors helped me with that, because I needed some more. And so I I knew that they were there, but I hadn't highlighted them. And I do like the idea of dropping in the clue, but don't lean on it because you don't want to give it away. I mean, the surprise and how is part of the fun of reading mysteries. So it has to be kind of very lightly, you know, whatever clues are given, whether they're emotional about the relationships or the subservience of people to people with wealth, which is a lot of what I write about, and the assumptions about the wealthy, which is that they can do no wrong. And we all know that they have tons of bad behavior that people, you know, kind of ignore. That's a lot of what I write about. So the way they're dressed, the clothing is part of the trying to distract away from where your attention might be, you know.
I thought it was particularly subtle the way you did that with your protagonist and the decision she makes at the end. That was really good. Kim, you had some subtle clues as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that one of the ones I struggled with early on was that, you know, I needed to have the person be able to get into the car, but why would her car be unlocked? So I had to drop a hint early on that her car had a problem with the passenger side door lock. And you think it's for one reason, I'm telling you, but actually there's a secondary reason that because you think the first one's really obvious, I'm hoping you'll ignore the second thing that's coming out of that piece of info. So you're like, okay, she's telling us that because there's a guy who's about to open the door. Great. But actually, the reason why the door is broken is oh so important for the larger plot and for the twist at the end. So I just think sometimes you give a clue and you make them seem like it's either part of something that's inconsequential or it has a particular purpose and they don't realize that there's a secondary purpose for it. Can be a good way to hide a clue in plain sight.
Also, there were those bruises early on that were a great clue as well as to the motivation of the protagonist.
Yeah, she's upset and we don't know why. And so I have to keep laying in small little clues about her upset. I know, like when I was reading Ellen, which I loved your stuff about the stereotypes of the old woman and stuff. I love the little clues. You and Nancy, you had all these great clues for your mystery. I think that the assumptions really played a lot into the way you put the clues out.
Can I just add one thing about Kim with your the air conditioning in the car?
Yeah.
So when I read your story and the air conditioning's not working in her car.
Right.
And then the door wasn't working. And so I just thought at first, oh, this is just, I've had cars like that are falling apart and are, you know, no good. And then of course the door became more and more important. And so when the guy jumped in, I thought, oh, that's why the door wasn't working. And then of course I didn't realize how the door became a weapon basically at the end. But.
And the reason why it was broken is part of her motivation as well. So there's I'm trying to layer in as much as possible with that door.
I hate to do this because we really could talk about this for a long time, but we're going to have to get on to the next panel. And thank you all for contributing.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Great short stories.
Yeah, they were terrific short stories.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so let's move on to the same as it always was with Dawn Barclay. And please, all the panelists on my panel, you know what you need to do.
Hey, everybody. I'm looking for Catherine Marisi and Mary Jo Robertiello to join. Pam Clark, if you're here, please join as well. I just want to correct, it's shame as it always was, the scourge of discrimination. Because it is a shame that these things happen. And I'm so glad we have some terrific authors today that are joining us. There are more stories about discrimination in both of the anthologies, ageism. Pam Clark, if she was here, would be talking about discrimination against the deaf community. There's sexism, white privilege, and sexual preference. But what we have is Catherine Marisi, who wrote When the Caged Bird Flies, and Mary Jo Robertiello, who wrote Family Matters. So welcome. I want you to, as the others did, just summarize your story in one line if possible. And then I'm going to come back to the question should be, what sparked your interest in the discrimination you highlight in your story? So why don't we start with you, Catherine?
Okay. My story is about a woman. A woman is raped and she evolves from victim to avenging angel.
Great. And so what sparked your interest in that?
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted, the theme of the anthology was justice for all. And a lot of most rape victims, or certainly a lot of them, don't find justice anywhere. And I wanted to show that a woman, she starts out fearful and afraid to leave her house, and ultimately she becomes strong physically and emotionally and mentally, and finds a way to find justice for other rape victims. She
Great.
doesn't get the chance for herself, but
Yeah, it was a hard story for us to classify because it involves so many different issues in it. It's an excellent story. Mary Jo.
If I could say one thing,
Sure.
I didn't start out to write about discrimination. I was focused on the justice aspects.
Oh.
And I think through this joining together of the two chapters and analyzing the stories, I learned a lot about my own story. So thank you.
Wow, great. So same thing, Mary Jo, just your story in 1 or 2 lines, and then what sparked your interest in writing about that discrimination?
Sure. In Family Matters, I portray 2 successful gay men, a minister and a lawyer, who deal with the homophobia of the minister's mother's second husband. Wendy, the mother, is divorcing him. She is killed, and her son is one of the suspects. Now, I was sparked by this. Mine was about discrimination. The AIDS epidemic that kills so many gay men, and how LGBTQ people have had to fight for the right to be themselves, has always been very important to me.
Great. And next question, I'm going to start with you, Mary Jo. When you're an outsider, meaning that you write about a subject that doesn't necessarily affect you personally, how do you ensure that your point of view is accurate and that you understand what the person you're writing about is going through?
Oh, that's a very difficult question.
That's why I asked it.
You're getting even. Good for you. I guess I think about my gay friends and other people in that community, and I have a lot of them, and I ask them how they feel. And I try to base what I write when I write about people who are gay or LGBTQ. I always check with my friends who are in those categories. I think your question's excellent. Well, I hope I answered it.
You did. Catherine?
Yeah, I generally turn to research. I read what I can find about, in this case, victims of rape and other things that I've written. I've written about things that I have no idea about, and so I do research. I read a lot. I talk to people. In one case, I had a character. I had a sensitivity reader for one book because I was a little nervous about whether I had actually gotten it right. So there are a lot of ways to make sure.
Yeah, sensitivity readers are a fairly new phenomenon in writing. So how did you go about finding someone, and how was it working with them?
Well, actually, this was a friend of mine who is another author who fit the category that I was writing about. And she was very helpful, and she gave me, really good feedback. I learned early on when I first started writing my mysteries, the Chiara Corelli mysteries. I have 2 protagonists, and one is Black and one is white, and this goes back like 15 years. And a friend of mine, a Black writer, read it for me, not as a sensitivity reader, but as just another mystery reader to give me input. And she really tore me apart. So I learned early on that one has to be careful when writing about other, and I've done my best to be careful about that.
Excellent. So Mary Jo, I've got a question for you that was not on the list, and that is very interesting characters, your two protagonists. Do you have any plans to write about them in upcoming work?
I'm thinking of continuing to write about them, but I've also switched a bit to another format, and I'm so interested to hear what Catherine had to say. I've started another series in the 1950s. I might get back to the two guys. I go to Judson Memorial Church, which is a wonderful mixed population, and I based my characters on two of the people who were there. So I'm always looking to Judson for people to write about.
Wonderful. How about you, Catherine? It was another really compelling character. Could you see having her go on sort of like a Death Wish type series?
No, I don't think so. I'm already writing, you know, my mystery series, which takes a lot of time. And in addition, I do write romance. I've had published some romances, and I recently released a general fiction book. So I'm more involved with the full-length novels than I am with short stories, although I have published a number of stories.
Okay, so you've published short stories before, which is great. Mary Jo, was this one of your first short stories?
It is indeed, but I've written some others too, but this is one of the first ones.
Is this something you're going to stick with, or do you think you're going to concentrate on novels?
I think I'll do both.
Good. Great. We're a little, we have extra time because we are short one panelist, so I'm going to hand it back.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Don. I think, we're to number 4. Is that right? Yes.
Yes.
All right. So that means I'm looking for Don, you stay on, Kathy Cravat, L. Hartford, BJ Graff, and Melinda Loomis. This is same. Breaking all the laws, genre bending. I also think it's blending plots and POV. These 5 stories were, the word I want to use is going to sound hyperbolic. We're sort of magnificent. The genre blending, bending stuff is beyond me. And so reading them when 5 people who've done such a great job at it was sort of mind-blowing to me, so I'm really excited to talk to all of you. We have A Trial for the Books by Dawn. We have One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Kathy, Harbor Life and City Silt from Elle, and Sandman by BJ, and Like Deja Vu all over again. To give you guys a sense of what these stories are about, is we have a reality, not reality TV show, sort of. We have a microbe, we have mer people, we have a murder victim who isn't a murder victim, and then some dreams. They're wonderful. And I guess I'm going to start with Dawn, then we'll go to Kathy, L, BJ, and Melinda. If you, in that order, if you can give everyone just a brief overview of what the stories are, and then we'll get into the questions. Thanks.
Sure. My story is about an amateur blogger who was put on trial for his 1-star reviews, and the people that are trying him are publishers and authors.
All right, Kathy.
So mine is a noir story. It's about a flu demigod who visits a small town in Ohio and arrives to find out that his target is already dead. So it decides to solve the mystery.
All right, Elle.
Hi, yeah. Mine is a murder mystery set in kind of an alternate or futuristic New York City, where there are mermaids in the harbor, and they've become part of daily life, kind of with good results and with less good results.
And I love the mixed couple. It's the velour and the plastic. It's all so good.
Thank you.
BJ, you have some interesting twists. Would you give us a little quick overview of your story?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, it starts, the top Hollywood action star is found dead on a very shishi private beach, in the Malibu area.
And when detectives Eddie Piedmont and his partner Shin Miyaguchi turn up, and you have to know that Eddie has always idolized this star, for his styles, kind of a futuristic Steve McQueen. So they turn up at the star's home to talk to the widow. And what happens, but the star drives up in a brand new car. And so they realize they're dealing with something very different. And you get into this technology and the new sort of society aspects of things where top stars hire these MIMs, they're called, and they're sort of surgically altered doubles who can go to all the different parties and different events where stars really make their money in the futuristic world. So that's the basic idea.
That's so good, so good. Melinda, yours was, would you give us a overview of yours, your story?
Yes. My story, a young woman's nightmare about being carjacked, crosses over from dreams to reality.
Yes. All right. I think actually, you know what, I would like to set out for everyone, actually. I want to ask all of you, and maybe we'll do this reverse, maybe we'll start with Melinda. How did you come up with this sort of genre blending? Because I feel like everything from the dream stuff to the mer people, you're thinking entirely outside of the boxes. So for all of you, how do you approach these stories?
Well, as much as I'd like to say it was just a stroke of genius, it was actually a nightmare that I had about being carjacked. And it's basically almost everything that happens in the story happened to me, except the ending, of course. I had this nightmare about being carjacked. I woke up, it was still dark out. I was very displeased by how easy of a victim I was. And to make myself feel better, I kept going through these different scenarios in which I thwarted, the carjacker and emerged unscathed, which is not what happened in the nightmare. But also, as I was going through this, I was also thinking I should be writing this down because I could totally use this for a story.
It was disturbing.
It was, it was very disturbing.
It was disturbing.
Yeah, I was trying to make myself feel better.
Okay, didn't make me feel better, but that's all good. BJ, now, is this real? Does this really happen? Tell me how you came up with this twist.
Well, I worked in the film industry for quite a while. And one thing I saw, you see how things change over time. And when I was a little kid, of course, stars would never even hawk products. You simply wouldn't do that. And then they started hawking them, say, in Japan, but not in the States. And over time, I noticed this greater commercialization and commodification, both of the product and the star, and how stars, you make a lot of money by going to private events and all these things, but obviously you can't go to all of them, right? Because there'll be conflicts. So I thought, what happens if you get, you have doubles that your PR firm hires, and then you have other, technology for people who don't mind. You could also have holograms and this sort of thing that we're seeing already. But what happens if you take that further and you actually have, doubles who make money by, showing up and being the star when they're really not, that sort of thing, and going with that, and ties into, the stars themselves become equities that are traded on Wall Street and all that too. Yeah, so you have, because I mean, you're seeing that with the brands on stars. They'll have tattoos for things that they're hawking and everything. I've seen on a lot of sports stars, and there is, this idea of having them as equities that you actually trade, and whether they go up or down in terms of, popularity and all this. So this kind of stuff, I just thought, ugh, but there's really fun material for stories.
Yeah, I agree with you with the because there is an aspect to in the entire story, the sort of this theme that sort of makes you go, oh yeah, that maybe we should rethink where we're headed. Yeah. Now I have to. Now I want to come to you, Elle, because I think you play with the genre blending. Both we're in the future, and then we're also in a future with mer people. How did that come about?
I can't say specifically how. I'm at the point where I've come to accept that whenever I'm writing, fantasy creeps in somehow. I find it just really appeals to my brain as like a way to work through problems. because you can be very direct with fantasy, you know, like you have mer people and you have people in New York City, like humans, like that's a very, very clear distinction. So as I was thinking about the theme for the anthology, kind of justice and how that plays out, it just felt natural to me. I guess it's just how my brain works.
Well, and I did love with the justice aspect is at one point you sort of just drop a statement about, yeah, the mer people don't want the pollution in the water. And all of a sudden you're like, well, of course not. Like it was, you know, really sort of a lovely sort of addition there. It makes us think about the way that we're living. Now, I've got to bring this question back to Kathy, because I think possibly you have a really interesting POV and an interesting sort of genre bending aspect. How did you come up with your point of view character?
So I actually wrote this years ago before COVID.
Really?
Yeah, so I don't even, usually I can remember what caused it, but it probably has some way of you know, the way authors always say, what if, you know, just off the top of our heads. So it really was, what if a flu virus, and then it evolved to be a demigod, wanted to solve a mystery. And then it just came from that little kernel, where how it possibly could and why it possibly would. So that's where it came from, just crazy idea. So.
It certainly is. I'm thinking the only other time, I mean, clearly we have a cockroach in historical fiction where you have that point of view, but I think this is the first time where I'm like, oh, I'm a virus microbe. I'm like, it's amazing. Now I want to finish up here with this particular question on where you came up with this. Is Dawn, yours might be a dream we've all encountered at some point. Please give us some insight into how you came up with your trial.
Sure. Well, it helps that I have absolutely no allegiance to specific genre rules. So I should say that I managed to stick humor and snark into all my books. And I sort of genre hop anything I write. What happened was that one of the authors in the story happened to me. And on a blog tour, I got a 3-star review from some reviewer who felt my book wasn't Christian enough, even though I had never marketed it as Christian. And so then there was some thread with a bunch of well-known authors who were complaining about their 1-star reviews and the rationales the reviewers gave for them, and I was off. And I think any writer who reads that story will get it, that how ridiculous some of the 1-star reviews are.
That is true.
Yeah.
I haven't. Now, this is another question, and I'm wondering how you all sort of deal with this. Because you're outside of what the formula expectations are, and in suspense, you need to hit most, if not all of them, because there are expectations going in. You're sort of smashing some of those expectations, but not all of them. How do you manage that with readers so that we come away, which we did, I certainly did with all of your stories. I did not at any point want to throw the story across the room because I felt like I'd been cheated. And yet, if I go back in my mind, I'm not clear why I didn't feel that way. So when you were writing, how did you do that so that I came away from your story and were like, oh, that was delightful and weird? Anybody who wants to take that?
I will. I think you buy yourself a lot of leeway when you write humor or satire. First of all, I think people give you a wide berth. And I think as long as there's a sense that justice was done and the reader's sense of indignation was vindicated by the way the story ends, I think the readers will side with you as an author.
BJ, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was trying to put myself into the shoes of a reader, and there are certain cliches you have in stories. And I said, okay, they're going to expect this. You know, say I've read a lot of short stories with twins, you know, that'll happen. And I thought mine, oh, they're going to expect that. So play with it, you know, and kind of have some fun turning expectations around in different ways. And I thought that was one way to go. Just drive right into what you think the expectation will be and then play with it.
And you do that very well. Kathy.
I also think just as we insert clues for the mystery, we have to insert clues so that the reader knows what to expect. Like, the word flu is in my title. Right away, I start it's from the point of view of the flu demigod who speaks kind of old worldly and, like a centuries old flu demigod would. So you get hints right away. But I still think you have to stick to, if you're writing a mystery, you still have to have, the evolution of the mystery happen. So.
And you managed that really well. Elle, did you have something to add?
I did, yeah. I was going to add, actually, I really like what Kathy said about the kind of giving the hints, even as soon as the title. And for me, I think a lot of those hints come from the characters themselves too, and the way that they interact. Because my story, it's a little bit more lighthearted, and a lot of the stuff that I tend to write is. So my characters are also kind of, they're very lovable and they tend to have strong relationships. Whereas if it's like noir or something that's going to end up maybe with a darker ending, then you kind of have characters that are a little shorter with each other and kind of more, drama.
Oh, interesting. Melinda, your story, I think, might be if Dawn's has the most humor, you
mine has the least.
Yours has the least, yeah, which has some different challenges. And yet it worked. But you weren't relying on chuckles, because in Dawn's, I found myself laughing all the time. And actually, even as I'm thinking about it, the other stories, there were moments of something that was funny.
I've always been a big fan of the Twilight Zone. So when I started writing short stories, I kind of had this sort of natural mindset that, because some of the best Twilight Zone episodes have very unexpected endings where they just kind of come out of nowhere and kick you in the gut as a viewer. And so when I started writing short stories, I just sort of automatically felt that I had to do that. So I think with this particular story, it's something that could happen to anybody. It's somebody just going about her normal business. And then at the end, you have this twist at the end. So, and the thing is, I do like humor in stories, and I usually try to put at least one or two lines that are kind of at least lighthearted, but it just wasn't going to happen in this story. So.
No, it wouldn't have seemed right. I mean, I have to say, all of these stories, and when I went back yesterday and I was rereading them, and I still really love them. They're wonderful. And I thank you so much. We are running out of time. We're running out of time. Thank you so much for writing them. And I could not recommend these more highly. And with that, I'm going to shut up and we'll pass it on to panel number 5.
Thank you.
Which I think is me.
Which is you.
Yeah. Can't get off of this thing. I don't know if we realized that when we were organizing that, but it's me again. And I am got a great diverse selection of short stories with women sleuths, women protecting other women from abuse, women seeking revenge for wrongdoing, women placating family members by investigating or just looking into events that don't add up. So I'm going to be here with Susie Case, who wrote The World According to Lucy, Barbara DeMarco Barrett, the author of Pool Fishing, S.J. Haworth, who wrote The Edge, and Lori Robbins, who wrote Leading Ladies. And you can read their bios in the chat section. So ladies, if you could start, I have one. Wait, where is everyone? Hold on. I'm hoping I have you all because I don't have you pictured all on my screen. But if you could start with summarizing your story with one line and then explain, well, do that first and then I'll come back to the question. So I'm going to start with you, Susie, because I can see you on my screen.
Thank you. I want to start with a shout out to San Diego because I love being part of an organization that works together between all the branches. So cool. My story, The World According to Lucy, has a student who keels over in class, and the professor dives in to figure out what tattoos, sex trafficking, and classroom competition have to do with each other.
Great. How about you, Lori?
My short story is about a young woman and her card shark of a grandmother They solve a murder mystery using clues from their shared love of Broadway musicals.
Right, great. Barbara.
My story, Pole Fishing, it's in the Crossing Borders anthology. It's about a woman obsessed with finding things in her apartment pool. And she collects these things and they lead her down a darkish path, sort of light noir.
Great. And last but not least, SJ.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Am I coming up?
Yep.
Yeah, good. The Edge is about Griselda, an unreliable narrator who may or may not have murdered her husband. Is she a manipulative psychopath or is she a victim of one?
Excellent. So I'm going to go back in that order and say, how do your women conform or break stereotypes? Susie.
My story doesn't really have a stereotype. And it shows how things have changed because female professor, when I was in college, I had one female professor in 4 years. It's not an issue in 2021. The design world, completely gender fluid now. It's not part of that story. And my main character's superpower is her perfect pitch. Again, not reliant on physical strength or cool technology.
Great. Lori, same question.
Sure. My story deals to a large extent with ageism and the value of everyone's life. So the grandmother breaks a lot of stereotypes. And I think one of the big one is, I think the reader might expect her to rely on her granddaughter for things like technology. But the grandmother is very adept, thank you very much. And I want to agree also in that it's taken as a given, as opposed to something that's particular, like no one comments about it. This is who she is. But I think it does break a stereotype that we would have about someone of her age. She's also, as I mentioned, she's a gambler, she's a card counter, she is a crossword puzzle fan. So she's someone who's very reliant on what I guess you might call left brain attributes. And I think in that way, she does break that stereotype, although she faces, you know, in a medical situation, she faces what a lot of older people do. She's kind of dismissed, or she didn't really understand what happened. But we as readers know, she knows perfectly well what has occurred to her.
And a sugarholic, which I could relate to.
My favorite part, yes, she eats a lot of candy. She's very big on candy, and yet she's managed to live to a very healthy old age in spite of those habits.
Important lesson.
Yes.
Barbara. Barbara, you're next.
Well, I guess when my character Mimi discovers something awry at her apartment building, she just goes for it. She doesn't ask her hot boyfriend to help her. She just goes for it and doesn't ask permission from anybody, and just does what she has to do, which is to rescue somebody.
Yeah, she was a very sympathetic character. I liked her. And SJ, same question. How do your women confirm or break stereotypes?
Well, the stereotype is probably being a victim, which is the theme in this story. I use stereotype as a red herring to drag across the trail and mislead the reader one way and another. Griselda's hiding her victimhood or to herself. She's lying to herself. The group get on her case and she's snarky in her internal thoughts about them. This was a hard question for me because it really triggered me into thinking more deeply about it. I'm not sure I can say any more right now. Sorry.
That's all right, because I can substitute another question for you that I had if I had time, and that is, where your story I felt was different from the others is that yours is kind of an internal investigation. Like she's kind of working it out for herself in my mind. Is that true?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Although that was part of the trick too. That was the sleight of hand that was supposed to mislead. At the end, you know, did she do it or didn't she do it? Did the boyfriend do it? And did she kill him? I think I muddied the water so much that I had some responses that people didn't know themselves at the end of the story. I had a very clear idea, but I'm not sure it came across.
It was an interesting story for everybody, and I'm going to let anybody and everyone sort of battle it out as gender roles evolve. What characteristics, if any, do you think are specific to women? Are there any more? Yep, Lori.
I'll jump in. I think that, and it was very interesting to me, especially reading the other stories in my group, that one of the things that is a strength continues to be a strength for female characters is kind of their willingness to engage on a personal level. And it's something that I think it certainly isn't new, but I think it continues to be kind of used as a feminine strength. I'm not sure that I see that in male protagonists. And also for them, it's like their backgrounds bedevil them, they're tortured often in some way. Whereas again, for women, I think that's often a source of strength as opposed to a source of conflict in their stories. So yeah, it's their power.
Great. Go ahead, Susie.
I think another power is that women biologically are wired to be multitaskers. When a fetus is 5 months old, if it's a male fetus, there's a thing called the testosterone bath, which fries the lining between the right lobe and the left lobe of the brain. A female fetus doesn't have that testosterone bath. So women are able to be doing their job, thinking about the birthday party and wondering if they remembered to put the vacuum away. And so in mystery, a lot of this multitasking showed up in our stories, where the protagonist was able to be in different locations, whether or not she was physically there, and weave clues together quickly, which particularly suits the format of a short story when you don't have a lot of runway.
I never knew that. That's really interesting.
That's from Luann Brisendine's book, The Female Brain. It sold millions of copies. It's a wonderful, wonderful read about basic biology. And not surprisingly, her book, The Female Brain, sold 6 times more than her book, The Male Brain. Make something of that.
Very interesting. How about Barbara or SJ? Do you have any feelings, even how the women in your story inhabit the world maybe in a different way than men would?
I think, I would go with Lori. I think it's so true how female characters are just women. We get involved maybe when we shouldn't, we want to jump in and make it personal instead of, no, it's not up to me. So everything Lori said, I'm right there with her.
Yeah, just a quick note was it seemed to me more women were apt to go into therapy for abuse and more apt to be abused, and also more apt to be codependent with their abusers, and the focus being on the victim is an assumption of innocence. So I kind of liked not just that the victim turns, but she's setting that up as a camouflage.
Really interesting. Do you feel, and this was not a question I gave you in advance, so I apologize, but do you feel it's a woman's trait to want to fix things, and that's why you see female protagonists? Because I'm accused of doing this, so I'm just wondering if women are sort of programmed or wired to fix things. Anyone?
Come across quite a few men who like to fix things.
Yeah, I think it's more of a bell curve than binary. We're all wired uniquely, and some of us have more compassion. Some of us, I'd put me in that camp, really don't have much mercy. And so how you weave that together is really pretty unique to people, but it certainly has been a stereotype that women are more compassionate.
Are there any women in fiction that you can think about that totally buck the female stereotype?
It's interesting that you've asked that to me, because I feel like women protagonists have a harder time or are, sort of being unlikable in a way that I'm not sure is applied equally to male protagonists. Like, no one is upset about Sherlock Holmes not being friendly or saying things, but I do think that I do wonder if, even unconsciously that influences us. I mean, I certainly, not in this story, if I do say so myself, they're so likable. But I have written stories. I have written stories in which I've had, I think, talk about reviews that was upset that my protagonist wasn't more likable, if you will, or that the people around her were not, she had no cute, nice friends, that it was a very competitive environment, and that was problematic. So that is something that I have considered, and I'm going to try and be nice myself all the time.
Perfect. Anybody else have any last words? No. Well, thank you all so much. It's been really interesting. I'm gonna.
Oh no, that was just the.
You're just saying
that
goodbye.
Was a shout out to you, Dawn, for your wonderful moderating.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to. Thank you all so much. I'm going to hand it back to Carl, who's going to handle the last session, which I think has me again.
Yes, you can't get away, Dawn. You can't get away. So, okay, I see Lisa and Matt. I see Matt, and there you are, Joseph. Great, we've got all four people. Well, the last session is a difficult session because we've got four people who actually had to make the hard decisions in terms of who was in the volume, who was not, what stories fit the volumes, what stories didn't fit the volumes. And in many ways, it's a thankless job because you have to go through all of this and make these kinds of decisions. So let me start with Lisa. Lisa, what was your process in terms of, you got all these stories. How did you cull them into sort of fun lists and how they would fit in?
We were basically just looking for the best stories, and we got a lot of really good ones, and it was, it was quite a job. And it involved a lot of close calls and tough decisions. But I think ultimately we were more interested in quality, in as much diversity as we could get, than sticking really rigidly to the theme of border crossing, since that's such that can mean so many different things. So really it just takes a lot of time. And that's one thing, if you have not done a project like this before, and this was the first time that Matt or I had edited an anthology, just be prepared that it's to devote a lot of time for it, because there's no way to get around that. It's a time consuming process.
How many stories did you read?
Matt, do you remember? It was 50 something?
Probably, sounds about right. 50
Yeah.
to 60, I'd say.
50
Yeah.
something. Wow. That's a lot of stories. Let me ask Joseph, what was your process like in terms of sifting through the stories?
Well, I think New York Sisters in Crime handles things a little bit differently. The stories, when initially sent in, were given to a panel and they made the decision. Dawn and I were given the stories that were chosen out of the ones that were sent in. So we purely concentrated on editing.
Oh, wow.
We did have the right to refuse some of the
Right.
stories.
Yes.
Our belief was not to refuse anybody, but there were 3 stories that got heavy edits.
Right.
2 of those people decided not to go forward, and one of them did go forward, and their story got into the anthology.
Right.
So all the stories that were submitted, except for the ones that the writers chose not to include, were included in the anthology?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's a great way to approach this.
Yeah, it's different.
It's very different. So what was the panel's job?
The panel read the stories that were sent in, submitted, and chose the finalists, which were all supposed to be included in the ultimate volume.
Okay. Were they only New York writers or members of your chapter?
Yes.
I can't remember. I think so.
Yes, I don't think that will be the case in the future, but we might have opened it up to other people if they want to join the chapter to enter. And then I feel there will be more entries.
Mm-hmm.
So how about you, Matt, for Crossing Borders? Was this open to everyone, or who was it open to?
I think we're open to Southern California. I think I think one of the stories that I edited was from a writer in either LA or Orange County, Sisters in Crime.
Okay. And so how did you choose, you and Lisa, how did you choose how to help the stories, how to edit them? How much do you change? How much do you not change?
Well,
You first.
who do you want to answer that, me or Lisa?
You go first.
Or why don't you start, Matt?
All right. Well, I've been in writers groups for 20 years, so if I read something, I just try, if I can, I just try to make it better. I found that, and I have edited one other anthology, at least maybe didn't know about, but it's been a while. And I have found that the writers that have probably the most experience or the most open to criticism, to constructive criticism. So if you can show them how you can make not you can make, but how you can both make the story better, cut here, be more clear here. The good writers are all for it. They want to make, whatever's best on the page. So it was time consuming in some ways. It wasn't that difficult. There was some occasional pushback, and it's not my story, it's their story. But it had to be good enough to make the anthology, but some give and take. But like I said, I enjoyed working with the writers who were really concerned about making the stories the best they could.
Yeah. How about you, Lisa? Was your process different?
I think it's pretty much the same. I mean, I think the job of an editor is not to impose their own voice or their own vision on somebody else's work. The job of an editor is to look at that work, try to determine what the author's intentions are, and help them achieve them. And I think anything else, it's like, hey man, if I want to start imposing my own vision on a story, I should just go write my own story.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's tough to see where that dividing line is.
I don't think it is really.
No,
I mean,
okay.
It's, and I've done a lot of editing work since then, and most of the people I've worked with, and actually some of the least experienced writers have been the most receptive to critique as well. It just depends. That's really all it is. How can you help this person make the book or the story that they want to write, that they've written more, fulfill their own vision better?
Yeah. How about you, Joseph? Some stories took a lot more editing than others.
Right.
How did you decide what to do?
Well, first I had to set aside what other people were talking about, which is how would I write the story? And that's got to be set aside immediately. I tried to get into the head of the person writing the story and see what it is they wanted to do. And I guess, I don't know if Dawn has the same feeling. The bigger pieces of editing had to do with structure and not necessarily character, but other items and grammar and all that kind of stuff too. It was a big project.
Yes, it was. I worked as hard on this as I've worked on my own books.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Because it's not just you
Right.
who's the final product. You're representing the chapter and you're representing the author, and all that goes into it. I'd say a big problem was plot gaps and continuity.
Right.
If somebody does something in the beginning, you can't have them not doing it at the end. Or we had some issues with dates that didn't correspond. I'm very big on, researching. When somebody makes a statement, I'll research to make sure it's true. And if it isn't, I told them. But we had some really great stories, and I didn't feel that there was a huge amount of plot work that had to be done.
No, I don't think so. And the writers were pretty receptive to what we were doing.
Yes.
So did you have multiple rounds?
Yes. We had about 5 or 6 rounds.
Yeah, everybody had multiple rounds. Yeah. So
I think another thing that's important that where an editor can be really helpful, where I tried to be helpful, was making sure that people were using language in the way that best expressed what the point they were trying to get across. So I think precision of language is super important. And that's something that an editor can provide, that's not imposing your own views on the work, but that's just helping them express it better.
Right.
Great.
We tried to be really, we tried to be really, really deferential with that. Like, I would suggest rather than change, and then make sure they were okay with it.
Okay.
Always suggest. I'm not going to just change people's stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember one of my short story had some references to Colombian Civil War that just didn't relate to it at all. And Matt was kind enough to tell me to keep that out. So the editors were really helpful. Let me ask a final question here to all of you. You got a lot of people that are participating in this, and what would be the advice you would give them when they are constructing a short story for an anthology or for a magazine? What should they be careful about, and what should they focus on?
Do too much, it's a short story. I mean, there's only so much plot that you can fit into that that's going to make sense. You know, and if it starts getting too big, then you've got a novel on your hands, and save it for that.
Okay. How about you, Dawn?
Like I said before, make sure if you bring something up in the beginning, it follows through till the end. Just on a personal note, learn how to deal with track changes because we work in track changes. So if you don't know how to do that, it's a problem. And just know how to format, like one period, one space after a period, and just know basic formatting.
Yeah, basic things like watching out for typos. Some people, I work at Mysterical E, and people send manuscripts in that are just, I don't think they looked at them after they did a first draft and they just sent it in. Yeah. So that's a big deal.
Good. Matt, any last words?
It just kind of along the lines of what Lisa was saying in terms of, you know, when you're writing a short story, you've got to eliminate a lot and eliminate some of the subplots. And maybe you can't go too deeply into the protagonist subplot. And, you know, it was challenging. I'd say, you know, we had kind of a broad subject matter borders, crossing borders. So I would say and it was hard to kind of corral enough to fit them in. We're very broad in our idea of borders. So maybe when you're aiming for an anthology, try to stay as close to, if possible, to the subject matter as you can. Makes it easier for the editors.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard enough job. Well, good. Any last words from our editors?
I just want to say I had a blast doing it. I loved working with Joseph. I loved working with the writers and getting to know them and the way they think. And you know, I started doing more editing since then. So just because I was so inspired by doing this. So thanks to everyone who worked with us.
We had a great time. We had a great time, and there were so many emails every day that I missed it all after it was over.
Write to me anytime.
Nice. Well, good. I would just like to say too that I'm sure we will be publishing anthologies in the future. New York, I don't know whether you've got a date yet for your next anthology, but you will be. And just from San Diego's standpoint, will be publishing an anthology in 2023. We'll be taking submissions, you know, up to July this year. So this is an ongoing process that I think works great for our chapters.
That's because for those out there who don't know, VoucherCon is coming to San Diego next year, 2023.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So we hope to see all of you at VoucherCon in San Diego in 2023. So do we have any questions from those that are listening in?
I don't have any questions in the Q&A. That's where they should be. I'm not sure. I don't think there's any in chat either. I can read the ones that were answered. Someone wanted to know the titles. They were all in chat. So if you want to look back in chat or copy chat, you'll know who wrote what. And since NY chapter is really tri-state, will settings and authors be outside the city be considered? Settings usually have to be within the tri-state area, but as long as you're a member, we'll take and look at your story. So join. I'm part of membership, so please join.
That segues right into what I want to say in terms of last words. Please join. It's a great community. And the national chapter gives us all kinds of resources, and there's a lot of great stuff we all do locally, both in New York and in San Diego. I also want to urge you to buy the books. Kim, you're going to put in some links here where those that are listening can buy the anthologies. So please go out and support them. That'll support our chapters. It'll support the authors and the editors here. I would just like to thank all the authors and editors that have participated here. It's been my pleasure, and would like to thank the audience too for learning a little bit about what went into writing these anthologies. Particular thanks to the three other people I worked with, Kim Keyline, who's been behind the scenes, sort of organizing and making sure all the technical aspects go onto this, plus she's a terrific writer. Dawn Barkley as well, she's a terrific writer, editor, as well as Allison Rosenvinch. She's a great writer, and we hope you'll buy her book, and a terrific president to the New York chapter. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thank you. Have a great Saturday.
Thank you.